You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 241.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You've reached The Local Maximum. I have a few announcements before we get into our interview today. I actually have 3 interviews in the can, which is I'm totally ahead of the game as to where I usually am. I usually have one interview and I get it out the next week just in time. But I have 3 interviews. That means I have more than 3 weeks worth of material because I'm going to intersperse them with solo shows and shows with Aaron. So you're hearing the first of those 3 today. I actually think that these 3 interviews kind of complement each other really well. Now, they're more obvious in terms of how useful they are to you if you're a software engineer, but I think there's something for everyone in here. Today is going to be the more software engineer, software product focused, but then we're going to kind of broaden out to careers in general. Today's interview is with Žiga Fajfar, and it's about a trend in web development and software engineering more for the masses. The next one coming up is going to be about a spin-off from the MIT math department. So people who are using very specialized knowledge to improve companies at scale. And then and a few weeks down the line, I'm talking to one of the world's leading expert on customer-focused product development. And I'm talking to him about his new book on conducting your job search. And that is, I think, one of the standout interviews. It's surprisingly fun. So I'm looking forward to getting that out once the book comes out. So here are some updates on what I'm working on. As you know, there's newmap.ai. That's that's the kind of open source software that I'm working on. I've decided to take a little time from that, although this is kind of related, to start a new series of academic papers. These will be more math papers. I'm taking ideas from probability theory and measure theory and not getting too complicated into these ideas, but kind of re-systematizing them from a computing point of view. So I'm looking for help, basically. If you're interested in being a co-author or just someone who wants to help me revise or figure out where to post these, and I'll put you in a thank you and at the footnote, just let me know. I'll do a call with you. We'll figure it out. Go to localmaxradio.com or maximum.locals.com for more details. All right, let's get back to what we're talking about today. My next guest is a serial tech entrepreneur who has launched many successful ventures and is currently focusing on scaling Flow Out. We're going to talk about the so-called no-code trend. And as you'll see, I start off very confused about no code. So you might be confused about no code too. Let's try to clear this up. Let's bring it up. Žiga Fajfar, welcome to the Local Maximum, or as I usually say, you've reached the Local Maximum. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. All
right. So today we're talking about no code. Or as it's sometimes called, the no-code movement, which is like, that adds a whole other level of visuals to it, like it's a movement somehow. But first of all, let's just talk about code to start out. Like, tell us a little bit about your background in engineering, kind of the things that you were working on, and then what led you to, and like then we go into like what is no code and what led you to discover like what is it? Because to me it just sounds like we're not doing anything now because all we're doing is coding before. So what are we talking about with no code?
So yeah, my background is actually in computer engineering. So I used to be a front-end engineer at various startups and also agencies before that. And at some point, I started to look at different tools that were rising in popularity. For example, like stuff like Shopify, stuff like Webflow, Bubble, and so on. And at some point, you start using these tools. You see they're really useful for what you do every day. So, at some point, you don't have to write HTML and CSS from scratch anymore, right? You can just build out the entire design and, let's say, Webflow, export it, and just use it like that. So I began by using these tools to complement my day-to-day work. And at some point, we a friend of mine and myself, we founded a business. We founded Flowout. and just started offering Webflow development and design. So my background is in development, his is in design. So we kind of complement each other and just focused exclusively on no code.
So tell me, and maybe tell the audience who maybe not everyone has coded or has done engineering. I've done well. I've done mostly back end work recently, but I started out on front end work, especially on the web, which is just could be a nightmare, especially in the 2000s. What's involved with HTML and CSS as you see it? And what's it like to use these tools as a comparison? Like, what do they do?
So these tools, basically, what they help you with is mostly if you need just slicing up some files, some designs to implement some variables in it, or just to connect it with some backend API or something. It helps you build these pages. It helps you build your design out faster and easier. So it does save you a bunch of time. For example, a couple of times before starting this business, I tried to, write HTML. So I tried to transform certain designs to HTML and CSS by hand, and then I tried to do the same thing using Webflow, and the difference was like 80% on average. So it saves you, let's say, 50 to 70% of time if you wanna do that. And this is just without all the logic, without all the CMS stuff that can be built in behind it. So yeah.
So what's the difference between a tool like Webflow and something like Squarespace or WordPress, where you're kind of, you just are building a website as a service?
So in general, I'd say Webflow is kind of like if WordPress was a software as a service product, right? If WordPress wasn't a self-hosted CMS, it would be probably something like Webflow. And this is where Webflow's largest USP, at least in my eyes, comes in, which is it doesn't have all the biggest flaws of WordPress, which I guess is its biggest competitor, right? So you don't have to update plugins. You don't have to administer your Linux servers where you host the website. You don't have to worry about performance as much, right? You don't have to worry about hacks. So these are the details that most businesses don't have the time or the manpower to handle, and Webflow helps you do that. So this is kind of the largest difference, I'd say. But if you at the other hand,
WordPress,
right? The other side,
WordPress, I've had experience with. There's a lot of hacks. Not so much Squarespace, because they have got a whole company built up around it. And, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So with projects and products like Squarespace and Wix, for example, those are way simpler. So those are for, let's say, really small businesses who just build out a website by themselves, and that's it. So those aren't really even competitors, I'd say, in 90% of the cases.
It's interesting because I've been on both ends of it. Because of my work at Foursquare, we had the Foursquare web, big tech startup in New York. I was building out admin pages, really, and I had to deal with the JavaScript and CSS on my own a little bit. And then on the other hand, for the podcast, I'm just using Squarespace and sort of just having the company do it all for me. So is this some kind of a middle ground? Because with Squarespace, you really don't get the control that you kind of want. Whereas with even with the modern day tools of JavaScript, it still could be kind of a pain to get going or to achieve your developer flow. So would you say that this is some kind of a happy medium, or am I not thinking of that properly?
Yeah, it is. It is. So it is. It is scalable to an enterprise level, which maybe Squarespace isn't. I still say that Squarespace is good enough or even perfect for plenty of cases for websites. But Webflow is ideal for customers. Our customers are mostly startups with SaaS products or some other IT or tech startups who need a bit more scalability, who have custom designs, who need some maybe functionalities that aren't that easy to integrate in builders like Squarespace or Wix. And those, I think, are the target audience.
How do you feel about the moniker no code? It's it's a very confusing label to me because it seems like there's still code involved. Is there not?
Yeah, especially in Webflow. If you want to display some data from some third-party API, you just need code. It's impossible to do without it. So yeah, there is, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think like actually there are two different directions I want to go. Maybe I'll go in like the easier direction first. Are there any critics of no code? Like, are there people who are either purists, maybe, who think you should? I mean, I feel like maybe 10 years ago there would have been, but what do you see as like the critics of no code, and why are they wrong, or maybe in what ways are they right?
So I haven't met actual critics yet. Mostly I would consider people skeptics. So there are plenty of skeptics, right? But there aren't that many critics because the tools make sense. It's just that some people don't yet trust them. They don't think they're good enough, built well enough yet to be actually useful. And maybe they aren't in some cases, but in many cases they are.
Well, a lot of people also have kind of old information. I know a lot of the technologies that like I use, my impression of it is when I first used it, was it 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago? So it's like, it's hard to, sometimes it's hard to keep people updated if they have a certain impression of it, because I think, how long has like no code been around? I in my head, I'm thinking like 5 years, maybe longer than that. I don't know. What's the history there?
I think the vision is older than that, but the products, being usable, it's in the past 5 years. But being actually, real life usable, it's been maybe 2 or 3 years, if that much. So I remember testing out Webflow like 3 years ago, and it wasn't the tool it is today at all.
Even 2 years ago.
even 2 years ago. So they began scaling basically back then at the time.
What was difficult to do with it 2 years ago that you can do now?
For example, the code that you exported was nearly as well formatted as it is today. The UI was way buggier. There was less functionality. The entire UX from onboarding to actually using the builder was terrible compared to what it is now. Cool.
So I feel like, well, this is what an interview is. I'm throwing questions at you, but I feel like I'm doing it more than a usual interview because I'm like, I'm so new with this technology. I'm just kind of rapid fire here, but I'm like, can we go through? Do you have any like examples of like, what's your canonical example of like, this is a product that I built or I saw or someone else built that is a great example of where something like Webflow is the perfect fit?
So we actually do plenty of those with our clients. Many of them are, for example, we built custom searches. We built results in booking platforms with no-code tools. So not just Webflow, but in combination with different tools like Firebase or MemberStack for authentication. Then we can use stuff like Airtable or even Google Sheets to store some data and use them as a database. So there's a possibility to build apps if you know how to use a little bit of code. You don't have to be a super excellent developer, right? You got to be a decent developer. You got to know you got to have some skills in, let's say, JavaScript, especially, and in HTML to do these things. But if you do have that, you can build some MVPs or even really well designed built web apps by using 90% no-code tools and just complementing that with some JavaScript knowledge, and that's it.
Okay, yeah, but so I'm still looking for like a specific example. Like, what was a project where it just worked particularly well?
So, for example, we built a gym builder for one of the biggest European retailers of gym equipment, where you could create an account and then you could actually have a 3D builder where you could build your own gyms for home or for like a actual gym. So we actually implemented a React.js app within Webflow, basically, with Firebase as an authentication and as a database to store all the data that the user saves. So that's maybe one complex example.
So do you mean to tell me, and I mean, if you want to share, I'd love to visit that site. Do you mean to tell me that's like a 3D or even a 2D, kind of a interior design application where you could like kind of move around gym equipment? Like what? Like that's what's in my mind. What is that? What you're
That's
doing
right.
here? Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's right.
how do you have? So that would be needless to say a nightmare to. I think a nightmare. I mean, my impression of JavaScript is many years old, but like it sounds like that would be a nightmare to implement in JavaScript. Do you mean tell me like there are tools in Webflow or tools that you use where you could build those kind of 3D applications for a client?
Yeah, so actually we used a tool. I think it's a British company that builds it. It's called Floor Planner, and we kind of integrated that within an authenticated user interface, right? So yeah, we used some third-party software and just connected it all together with with React.js, which we included within Webflow, and basically created a web app within Webflow. It's all hosted in Webflow, so we don't host anything on our local servers except for some proxy connections because you can't obviously make third-party API calls from the front end directly, right?
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
it is.
very
I mean,
cool.
it was a challenging project. It was especially, if you go the no-code way, there are a couple of compromises technologically that you have to do. You can't just use anything, basically, right? So planning it out is very important. But once you plan it out, it might take a day or two. You still save so much time. It's incredible. So we work for clients, right? So time is money. The less time we spend,
Right.
the higher the margin, right? If it's a fixed price project, for example.
So okay, so you mentioned the compromises. What's the catch? What are the main compromises you have to make usually?
I think it depends on a specific project, but one of the compromises we had to make recently was we had to delete some sub pages that were maybe not necessarily needed in a project because Webflow has a 100-page limit, so you can't have more than 100 pages, right? So you're kind of bound by what a specific platform offers you, right? You can just do anything. And for example, with Webflow, you can't do backend requests. It's all on the front end. You can just write JavaScript in the front end. Everything else has to be handled via an external proxy if you have it.
Okay, so like who develops Webflow and where are these things hosted?
Generally, Webflow has its own hosting, so they offer hosting, which is, I think, reasonably priced. But you can also export projects and just host them on your own. In which case, obviously, you lose all the CMS functionality and so on. You just export HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But yeah, you can also host them on your own.
So you also mentioned like some of these online database technologies, which is, I mean, yeah, Google Sheets is a simple one, which I use all the time. You mentioned Firebase, you mentioned Airtable. So these are all applications that allow you to store data online in kind of some structured way, and provides like an API for it. Like where first of all, like it seems like that's an important part of the no code ecosystem. Am I wrong to think about that way? And secondly, like what are the developments in like that space that are interesting? Like have there been benefits, for example, from upgrading to Google Docs to Airtable or something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, mostly the developments here are on the user-facing side. So the tools are easier to use, right? So Airtable, for a customer that you're building a product for, Airtable is easier to use than Google Sheets because there are these equations within each cell and so on. So that's kind of the way I think these things are moving because it's all it's all a spreadsheet basically. It's nothing too special. They're also mostly NoSQL databases. So in concept, it's basically the same. The main differentiator between them, I think, is the UX and the design itself. And ease of implementation, obviously, yeah. Google Sheets doesn't have maybe the best API in the world, right? If you use that, you would know.
Right. Yeah,
it's not perfect.
I've used it. I know.
It can be terrible. It can be a pain, right? So
yeah,
those are the things I think they're building mostly. Yeah.
Right. So have there been any new developments in that space? Like I know some of these, like Airtable came out, 5 years ago, something like that. Like, is that, or Firebase, what is your kind of go-to tech for that kind of, online, almost spreadsheet / database kind of application?
So again, it depends on the project itself. So what the specs are, but we really like to use Airtable, especially because it's easy to use for the customer, like a CMS kind of. So you can basically
Right.
build a CMS in Airtable, right? You can't really do that in Firebase because it's all just JSON, and the client
Yeah.
is like, okay, what is JSON? They can't read it. But in some cases where we just store some variables, for example, users that authenticate with Firebase, we just use Firebase also as a database. It's just simpler and makes sense.
Gotcha. I'm going to ask you now to like start to peer far in the future, like, or, as far as you want, but like, what is your, after having worked on this technology, like if we develop it to the point where it like reaches its full potential, what do you see as like the end goal, or at least a intermediate goal of no code and these kinds of technologies?
So I think stuff is gonna move into the direction where it's currently more low code, right? It's not totally no code, especially software like this. I think
Low
it's gonna
code.
move
I
more
kind
and
of like
more.
that low code moniker better, but maybe I'm not a marketer. I don't know. So anyway,
Yeah, I mean it's the truth, but you can't market something as low code. It's easier to sell it if it's just no
yeah,
code.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's gonna move more and more into the no code space. So you're gonna need less and less JavaScript and custom code and so on. With tools like Zapier, for example, jumping in and helping developers or even consumers just connect apps between themselves. But also another thing I think that's going to happen is marketplaces are going to pop up with all of these tools. So just like Shopify has a marketplace, like where you can build your own Shopify apps, right? I think Webflow is going to do the same, and maybe Bubble's going to do the same, and Wix and Squarespace and so on. And these ecosystems, these app store like communities, right, will be another revenue generator, I think, for many businesses to come. So I think this is the space where everything's going to move. This is also why we are starting not just to work as an agency and build, no-code products. We're also building extensions for Webflow, like a multi-language tool. So we're gonna try to move into this space as well to maybe future-proof our own business.
So extensions, like what? Tell me about that. Like they allow extensions. I mean, a lot of a lot of companies do, especially is Webflow like open source software, or is it proprietary company?
No, so basically, imagine WordPress, right? So WordPress has
Yeah.
plugins, right?
Right.
You don't
Right.
have
Sure.
plugins with Webflow. With
Okay.
Webflow, if you ever need to integrate some other functionality that isn't included, you gotta either use something like Zapier, right, to display data or to send data and so on, or just integrate it via API. So it's always a third-party service, and we're going to build these third-party services, which are basically SaaS products, to integrate into Webflow. But they're all Webflow specific. Webflow does have an API, but it's not. Let's say it's not really usable because it's only for collections, which is the CMS. The builder itself doesn't have an API. So this is the direction that I mean.
So you mentioned, and I'm sorry, I keep pulling on threads from the different side, but you mentioned the multi-language tool. That's something we've talked about on the show. Well, we've talked about internationalization on the show a lot. Is that something that is important to you guys? And what do you think of the major challenges there that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, we are based in Europe, right? So in Europe, basically every website is multi-language. You just have to be there. So many languages in such a small area. And Webflow right now doesn't have a specialized tool for that. There is Weglot and Localize, which are like general translation tools, but there is no specific Webflow translation or multi-language extension or plugin or whatever.
Right.
And this is kind of the direction that we notice there's a demand. We also have a couple of pre-orders already with like a couple of Facebook posts, and that's it. So the traction is also there. And now we're just building it and launching in Q4. And it's just the first thing we have in the pipeline.
Now, is the type of thing you're trying to build like, hey, we have a bunch of different translations of this text and we want to store and organize it? Or do we want to have this thing where you write it once and it automatically gets translated?
Actually, in essence, it's a different business model than, for example, Weglot, which has these AI translations. You get 1 million words, for example, in a package that you can translate automatically with, I don't know, Google Translate or AWS or whatever they use.
Right.
We're going a different way. So our packages are basically planned like people are going to translate themselves. But you can also buy credits for AI translations and then translate it with, for example, Google Cloud, right?
Yeah.
That it's going to be a bit different. We won't charge a monthly fee for AI translations, but actually we're going to charge per word, because at least in Europe, where I believe our target audience for such a product is, most people want to translate themselves or hire some translators.
Right. I mean, we went through this, like, sometimes you have an example or a metaphor that works in one language doesn't work in the other language. And if you are, especially if you're trying to really look, any website you can go to Google Translate and you can get the gist of it. But like, especially if you really want to reach a certain audience in a certain language, you really have to translate it yourself.
Context is also important, right? And the tone. Yeah. It's not just about the words and the literal translations.
Right. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. Žiga, can you finish out just by telling us, like, what are some of your like last thoughts on this technology? What are the things that people need to should take away about it? Where do you think it's going? And maybe tell us where we could find you guys online.
Of course. So like I said, I think what's going to happen is there are going to be more and more products popping up. More and more people are going to identify themselves as no-code developers or no-code freelancers and help build products. And I think many interesting products are going to pop up just from the fact that there are going to be more people with the resources and knowledge to build some MVPs and test them out. You can find us on flowout.com or just connect with me via Twitter or LinkedIn or the company. Right. So that's it.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. All that will be linked on our show notes page. Žiga, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Max.
All right. That's it for today. Next week, I'm not really sure if we're going to go back into more interviews next week, or I will go back and do some solo shows or a show with Aaron. We're definitely going to continue doing our probability distribution of the week. We've almost wrapped up all of the kind of finite distributions that I wanted to talk about. So that's exciting. And I talked about those interviews from really fascinating companies and people and authors coming up in the next few weeks. So definitely stay tuned. Remember to go to maximum.locals.com to join our locals, and you could talk to me about anything. I respond to everyone. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.